The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of Arizona Territory as Sam Martinez guided his horse through the rocky canyon that led to his isolated ranch. The year was 1882, and the frontier was still a dangerous place where justice often came at the end of a rope. Sam had chosen this remote location deliberately, seeking solitude after losing his family to a cholera outbreak 3 years earlier. His ranch sat tucked between towering red rock formations, miles away from the nearest settlement of Copper Creek. Sam was a man of few words but strong principles. Standing tall at 6 feet with weathered hands and kind eyes, he had earned respect among the local Apache tribes for his fair dealings. Unlike many settlers who viewed the natives with suspicion and hatred, Sam understood that survival on the frontier required mutual respect. He traded fairly, never cheated anyone, and had even learned enough Apache to communicate during business dealings. On this particular morning, Sam noticed something unusual as he approached his property. Smoke was rising from the direction of Copper Creek, but it was the wrong kind of smoke. Instead of the gentle wisps from cooking fires, thick black columns billowed into the clear sky. His experienced eye told him this was trouble. After securing his horse, Sam climbed to a high ridge overlooking the valley and pulled out his old army field glasses. What he saw through the lenses made his blood run cold. A crowd had gathered in the town square, and 7 young Apache girls, none appearing older than 16, stood with nooses around their necks beneath the hanging tree. The girls wore traditional Apache clothing, and even from this distance Sam could see their terrified faces. Around them, an angry mob of townspeople shouted and gestured wildly. At the front of the crowd stood Mayor Benjamin Hawthorne, a man Sam had always distrusted for his greedy nature and political ambitions. Sam lowered the field glasses and felt his jaw tighten. He had seen enough frontier injustice to know that something was terribly wrong with this scene. Apache girls this young would never have committed crimes deserving of hanging. The Apache people he knew were protective of their children and taught them respect for others. These girls were likely innocent of whatever charges had been brought against them. Without hesitation, Sam mounted his horse and rode hard toward town. As he galloped across the desert floor, memories flooded back of his own daughter Maria, who would have been about the same age as these girls if she had lived. The thought of innocent children facing death filled him with determination. He had failed to save his own family from disease, but he would not stand by and watch these girls die for crimes they likely did not commit. The wind whipped through his hair as Sam pushed his horse to its limits. He knew he had perhaps an hour before the hanging would take place. Based on the positioning of the sun and the way frontier mobs typically operated, they would want to draw out the spectacle, make speeches, and work the crowd into a frenzy before carrying out their grisly work. This gave him a narrow window of opportunity, but he would need to be clever about his approach. As the town grew larger on the horizon, Sam began formulating a plan. He could not simply ride into the middle of an angry mob and demand the girls' release. That would likely get him killed and do nothing to help the innocent victims. Instead, he would need to use his knowledge of the town's people and their weaknesses to find another way. Sam had lived in this territory long enough to know that most frontier justice was driven more by fear and prejudice than by actual evidence of wrongdoing. The closer he got to Copper Creek, the more certain Sam became that these girls were pawns in someone else's game. Mayor Hawthorne had been pushing for the removal of all Apache tribes from the area, claiming they were a threat to development and commerce. What better way to justify harsh action against the Apache than to stage a public execution that would inflame anti-native sentiment throughout the territory? Sam realized he was not just racing to save 7 innocent lives, but potentially to prevent a war that could claim hundreds more. Sam arrived at the outskirts of Copper Creek, just as Mayor Hawthorne climbed onto a wooden platform that had been hastily constructed near the hanging tree. The crowd of nearly 200 people pressed closer, their faces twisted with anger and bloodlust. Women held their children back while men shouted demands for immediate justice. The 7 Apache girls stood silent and dignified despite their obvious terror, their dark eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of hope. Sam dismounted and tied his horse to a hitching post behind Murphy's General Store, staying out of sight while he assessed the situation. Through a crack in the wooden fence, he could hear Mayor Hawthorne addressing the crowd with theatrical gestures and a voice full of righteous indignation. "Citizens of Copper Creek," Hawthorne bellowed, These savage children were caught red-handed stealing from our supply wagons and threatening our women and children. They must pay the ultimate price to send a message to their people that we will not tolerate such behavior in our Christian community. Sam's suspicion deepened as he listened to the accusations. Supply wagon theft was typically handled by the territorial marshal, not by lynch mobs. Moreover, Apache children were taught from birth that stealing brought shame to their entire family and tribe. The charges sounded fabricated, designed to justify what Hawthorne really wanted: a reason to drive the Apache from their traditional lands. Moving carefully through the back alleys, Sam made his way to the rear of the crowd where he spotted Doc Henderson, the town's physician and one of the few reasonable men in Copper Creek. Sam had delivered medical supplies to Doc Henderson during several emergencies, and the two men respected each other despite their different backgrounds. "Doc," Sam whispered, grabbing the older man's sleeve. "What evidence do they have against these girls?" Doc Henderson's face was pale with concern. "Not a shred of real proof, Sam. Hawthorne claimed some of his men witnessed the theft, but nobody else saw anything. Those girls were found camped peacefully near the creek with their grandmother, gathering medicinal plants. The old woman is sick with fever and couldn't travel, so the girls stayed to care for her." "Then why aren't you speaking up?" Sam demanded. "Because anyone who opposes this will be branded an Apache sympathizer," Doc Henderson replied grimly. "Hawthorne has whipped this crowd into such a frenzy that rational thought has fled. I tried to examine the girls for injuries that might support the theft charges, but Hawthorne refused to allow it." Sam's mind raced as he processed this information. The mayor was clearly orchestrating a frame-up, but stopping it would require more than just speaking the truth to an enraged mob. He needed leverage, something that would force Hawthorne to back down or face consequences worse than losing face in front of the townspeople. Suddenly, Sam remembered something crucial. 3 weeks earlier, he had been hunting in the hills when he witnessed a secret meeting between Mayor Hawthorne and a group of land speculators from back east. They had been discussing plans to claim Apache territory for a railroad development project, speaking in hushed tones about the need to clear out the Red Menace before the territorial governor could intervene with protective treaties. At the time, Sam had thought it was just typical political scheming, but now he realized the full scope of Hawthorne's plan. The mayor was not acting alone in this injustice. He was following orders from powerful men who stood to make fortunes if they could seize Apache lands for railroad construction. The hanging of these innocent girls was meant to be the spark that would ignite enough anti-Apache sentiment to justify forced removal or worse. Sam knew he had to act quickly. Mayor Hawthorne was building toward the climax of his speech, and the crowd was growing more agitated with each passing minute. The girls had perhaps 10 minutes before the nooses would tighten around their necks, but Sam also knew that charging into the crowd with accusations would accomplish nothing without proof. Racing back to his horse, Sam retrieved a leather satchel from his saddlebags. Inside were documents he had been carrying to the territorial capital, including survey maps and correspondence related to land disputes in the area. More importantly, he had a letter from the territorial governor explicitly forbidding any actions against Apache tribes without proper legal proceedings and evidence. Armed with this official document and his knowledge of the secret meetings, Sam strode boldly into the crowd. He pushed through the mass of people, ignoring their angry protests, until he stood directly in front of the platform where Mayor Hawthorne was preparing to give the signal for the execution. "Mayor Hawthorne," Sam called out in a voice that carried across the entire square, "I have here an official letter from Territorial Governor Murphy that explicitly forbids this proceeding." The crowd fell silent, and Hawthorne's face went pale. Sam continued before anyone could respond. "Furthermore, I have information about your secret meetings with Eastern land speculators that explains your real motivation for this illegal execution." Hawthorne's composure cracked visibly, but he quickly attempted to regain control. "You're lying, Martinez. Everyone knows you're an Apache lover who can't be trusted." Sam held up the governor's letter high enough for everyone to see the official seal. "Then you won't mind if I read this aloud to everyone, will you, Mayor? And afterward, we can discuss those survey maps you've been hiding from the townspeople." The tension in the town square was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sam held the official letter above his head. Mayor Hawthorne's face had gone from pale to red with anger, but Sam could see the fear in his eyes. The crowd murmured uncertainly. their bloodlust momentarily cooled by the mention of the territorial governor's authority. "Citizens of Copper Creek," Sam announced, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "This letter from Governor Murphy states that no action may be taken against any Apache individuals without proper investigation by territorial marshals and formal charges filed through the territorial court system." He began reading from the document, his words causing ripples of unease through the assembled townspeople. Many had assumed they were acting within their rights as frontier citizens, but the governor's explicit instructions made their current actions clearly illegal. Sam could see doubt creeping across faces in the crowd as they realized they might be participating in something that could bring territorial law enforcement down upon their heads. Mayor Hawthorne attempted to regain control of the situation. "That letter could be forged," he shouted. "Besides, we have the right to protect our community from thieves and murderers." "Then let's examine your evidence," Sam replied calmly. He turned to address the crowd directly, bypassing Hawthorne's authority. "Has anyone here actually seen these girls commit any crime? Not heard about it secondhand, but witnessed it with their own eyes?" The crowd fell silent. After several long moments, a few of Hawthorne's closest associates began to speak up, but their stories were vague and contradictory. One claimed the girls had stolen flour from a supply wagon, while another insisted it was ammunition. A third man changed his story twice in the span of a single minute, clearly making up details as he went along. Doc Henderson stepped forward from the crowd, his medical bag in hand. "I examined the supply wagon that was allegedly robbed," he announced. "There are no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, and the inventory sheet shows nothing missing. Furthermore, I've examined the girls, and none of them show any signs of the physical exertion that would be expected from carrying heavy stolen goods across rough terrain." Sam seized this momentum and produced the second document from his satchel. "Moreover, I have here a survey map that shows this entire area marked for seizure by the Transcontinental Development Corporation. This includes not only Apache lands, but also several of your own properties that will be claimed under eminent domain for railroad construction." The crowd erupted in shocked voices as townspeople realized they had been manipulated. Many of them owned small parcels of land that they had worked hard to develop, and the thought of losing their property to Eastern corporations filled them with outrage that now turned toward Mayor Hawthorne rather than the Apache girls. "That's not true," Hawthorne protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I would never agree to anything that would harm this community." Sam reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "Then perhaps you can explain this meeting that took place on October 15th, approximately 3 weeks ago in Devil's Canyon. I was hunting deer when I observed you meeting with 3 men in expensive Eastern clothing. I recorded their conversation, including your agreement to eliminate the Apache problem in exchange for a percentage of the railroad profits." The mayor's face went ashen as Sam quoted directly from his notes. The crowd's mood was shifting rapidly from anger at the Apache girls to fury at their own mayor for deceiving them. Several men who had been calling for immediate hanging now stepped back from the platform, distancing themselves from the proceedings. One of the Apache girls, the eldest, who appeared to be about 16, spoke for the first time since the ordeal began. Her English was clear and precise, learned from missionaries who had taught at the local Apache settlement. "We came to gather medicine plants for our grandmother who is very sick," she said with dignity despite her desperate circumstances. "We took nothing that was not freely given by the earth. We have harmed no one and taken nothing that belongs to others." Her words carried such genuine sincerity that even the most hardened members of the crowd began to look uncomfortable. The contrast between her quiet dignity and Mayor Hawthorne's increasingly frantic denials was stark and telling. Sam pressed his advantage. "I propose we do what should have been done from the beginning. Let's take these girls to the territorial marshal in Tucson for proper investigation. If they're truly guilty of crimes, they'll face justice through legal channels. But if they're innocent, as all evidence suggests, they'll be returned safely to their families." "And what about the survey maps and the railroad development?" called out James Murphy, the blacksmith. "Are we all going to lose our land to these Eastern corporations?" Sam nodded grimly. "That depends on whether we stand together as a community or allow ourselves to be divided and conquered. Mayor Hawthorne has been playing us against the Apache to distract us from his real agenda. While we've been focused on fear and hatred, He's been arranging to sell our entire community down the river." The crowd's anger was now fully directed at Mayor Hawthorne, who was backing away from the platform with growing panic in his eyes. Several of his closest associates had already melted away into the crowd, unwilling to be associated with his scheme now that it had been exposed. But Sam knew the danger was not over yet. Desperate men could be more dangerous than angry mobs, and Mayor Hawthorne still had supporters among the rougher elements of the town. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would prevail, or whether violence would still claim innocent lives. Mayor Hawthorne's panic quickly transformed into desperate rage as he realized his carefully constructed plan was crumbling before his eyes. The crowd that had been his weapon against the Apache girls was now turning against him, and the revelation about the railroad development had destroyed his political future in Copper Creek. But Hawthorne was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. "You fools," he snarled at the crowd, his mask of civility finally dropping completely. "Do you think Martinez cares about any of you? He's chosen those savages over his own people. When the Apache come to burn your homes and steal your children, remember that you had the chance to send a message today." As Hawthorne spoke, Sam noticed that several rough-looking men were moving through the crowd toward the platform, where the girls still stood with nooses around their necks. These were not ordinary townspeople but hired gunmen that Hawthorne employed for his more questionable business dealings. Sam recognized at least 3 of them as wanted men who had been causing trouble throughout the territory. The lead gunman, a scarred brute named Jake Morrison, stepped onto the platform and reached for the rope that would spring the trap door beneath the girls' feet. "The mayor's right," Morrison growled. "These Apache need to hang, and anyone who protects them is a traitor." Sam's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, but he was vastly outnumbered. Morrison had at least 6 armed men positioned around the square, and any gunfight would likely result in innocent townspeople being caught in the crossfire. He needed to find another way to protect the girls without starting a massacre. Doc Henderson stepped forward bravely, despite being an elderly man with no fighting experience. "Morrison, you have no legal authority here. Release those girls immediately, or face the consequences when the territorial marshal arrives." Morrison laughed harshly and drew his gun, pointing it directly at Doc Henderson's chest. "The only authority I need is right here in my hand, old man. Now step back before you join those Apache brats." The crowd began to panic as Morrison's men revealed their weapons, and people started pushing toward the edges of the square seeking safety. In the confusion, Sam saw his opportunity. He had noticed that the rope holding the trapdoor mechanism was secured with a simple slip knot that could be released quickly if he could get close enough. But first, he needed to create a distraction that would draw Morrison's attention away from the girls. Sam remembered the small pouch of black powder he carried for blasting rocks on his ranch property. It was not enough to cause serious damage, but it would create a loud explosion and plenty of smoke. Moving carefully through the panicking crowd, Sam made his way to the base of the platform while Morrison was focused on intimidating Doc Henderson. He quickly poured the black powder into an empty tin can he found discarded near the general store, added a short fuse made from his bootlace, and positioned it behind a wooden crate where it would create maximum noise and confusion without endangering innocent people. After lighting the fuse with a match, Sam counted to 5 and then shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone down! Dynamite!" The explosion that followed was thunderously loud but harmless, filling the square with thick smoke and sending people diving for cover in all directions. In the chaos that ensued, Sam leaped onto the platform and tackled Morrison, who had been momentarily stunned by the unexpected blast. The 2 men crashed to the wooden planks, fighting desperately for control of Morrison's gun. Sam was older and smaller than the gunman, but years of hard ranch work had kept him strong, and his motivation to save innocent lives gave him extra determination. They rolled across the platform, each trying to gain the advantage while the smoke swirled around them. Meanwhile, Doc Henderson and several other townspeople had rushed to help the Apache girls, cutting their bonds and removing the nooses from their necks. The girls, though frightened, maintained their composure and helped each other down from the platform to safety behind the general store. Morrison's men were firing wild shots into the smoke, but they could not see their targets clearly and were afraid of hitting their own leader. Sam managed to knock Morrison's gun away, sending it skittering across the platform, but the larger man quickly gained the upper hand in the physical struggle. Just as Morrison was about to overpower Sam completely, the Apache girl who had spoken earlier appeared through the smoke carrying Morrison's lost revolver. Instead of fleeing to safety with her companions, she had chosen to stay and help the man who had risked everything to save her and her friends. "Let him go," she commanded Morrison in perfect English, holding the gun steady despite her youth and the traumatic ordeal she had endured. "Your fight is with me and my people, not with this good man who speaks truth." Morrison froze, realizing that the tables had been completely turned. The girl he had been prepared to execute now held his life in her hands, and her calm demeanor suggested she knew how to use the weapon she carried. Around the square, the smoke was beginning to clear, revealing that most of Morrison's men had fled when they realized the tide of battle had turned against them. Mayor Hawthorne, seeing his final gambit had failed, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He pulled a hidden derringer from his coat and aimed it at Sam's back, but his hands were shaking so badly from fear and rage that his aim was unsteady. The Apache girl saw the mayor's movement and shifted her aim to cover him as well. "Drop your weapon," she ordered with the same quiet authority. "There has been enough violence and lies for one day." The standoff in Copper Creek's town square had reached its climax, with the young Apache girl holding Morrison's gun steady on both the hired gunman and Mayor Hawthorne. The smoke from Sam's explosion was clearing, revealing the full extent of how dramatically the situation had changed. The 7 Apache girls who had been minutes from execution now stood free, while their accusers faced the consequences of their deception. Sam slowly got to his feet, brushing dust from his clothes while keeping his eyes on Morrison. The big gunman remained on his knees, his face twisted with rage but his body held motionless by the threat of the weapon pointed at him. Around the square, the townspeople who had been calling for blood just minutes earlier now watched in stunned silence as they processed the truth they had been told. "Mayor Hawthorne," Sam said in a voice that carried across the square, "I suggest you put down that derringer before someone gets hurt. Your scheme is finished, and continuing down this path will only make things worse for you." Hawthorne's hand trembled as he kept the small pistol trained on Sam's back. His political career was destroyed, his business deals were exposed, and his reputation in the community was ruined beyond repair. The man was desperate enough to do something truly foolish, which made him more dangerous than ever. "You've destroyed everything I worked for," Hawthorne snarled. 20 years of building this town, bringing civilization to the frontier, and you've thrown it all away to protect a handful of savages. The Apache girl who held Morrison at gunpoint spoke with calm dignity that made her seem older than her 16 years. "We are not savages. We are human beings with families who love us and communities that depend on us. We harvest medicine to heal the sick. We gather food to feed the hungry, and we teach our children to respect all living things. What you plan to do today would have made you the savage, not us." Her words cut through the tension in the square and reached something deep in the hearts of the assembled townspeople. Many of them had come west seeking freedom and opportunity, fleeing from poverty and persecution in the East. They understood what it meant to be judged unfairly and to have their humanity questioned by those who held power over them. Doc Henderson stepped forward, his medical bag in one hand and his other hand raised peacefully. "Mayor Hawthorne, as the senior member of this community, I'm asking you to surrender your weapon and submit to territorial authority. We've all been manipulated today, but we can still do the right thing." The sound of approaching horses echoed from the edge of town, and everyone turned to see a group of riders wearing the distinctive uniforms of the Territorial Marshal Service. Sam felt a wave of relief as he recognized Marshal Thompson, a fair-minded lawman who had served the territory for over 15 years. Someone must have ridden to alert the authorities during the confusion. Marshal Thompson dismounted and surveyed the scene with experienced eyes, taking in the platform with its hanging nooses, the armed standoff, and the crowd of nervous townspeople. He had seen enough frontier justice to understand immediately what had been prevented. "I received word that there was an illegal hanging taking place in Copper Creek," the marshal announced. "It appears we arrived just in time." His gaze settled on Mayor Hawthorne, who still held the derringer but was now clearly outnumbered and outgunned. "Marshal," Sam called out, "these Apache girls were falsely accused of theft as part of a scheme by Mayor Hawthorne to incite anti-Apache sentiment. I have evidence of his involvement with eastern land speculators who want to seize both Apache and settler property for railroad development." The marshal nodded grimly. "We've been investigating reports of illegal land grabbing throughout the territory. Mayor Hawthorne, You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Drop your weapon immediately. Faced with professional lawmen and the complete collapse of his support, Hawthorne finally lowered the derringer and let it fall to the ground. His shoulders sagged in defeat as he realized his crimes would now be investigated by territorial authorities who could not be bribed or intimidated. Morrison and his remaining men were quickly arrested by the marshal's deputies, while the townspeople began to disperse, many of them looking ashamed of their earlier behavior. The Apache girls gathered together near the general store, finally safe but still processing the trauma of their near execution. The eldest girl approached Sam and handed him Morrison's revolver. "Thank you for risking your life to save ours," she said simply. "You have shown us that there are good people among the settlers, just as there are good people among the Apache. Perhaps someday our peoples can live in peace as neighbors instead of enemies." Sam accepted the gun, but his attention was focused on the girl's words. "What's your name?" he asked. "I am called Morningstar," she replied. "My grandmother taught me to speak English so that I could serve as a bridge between our peoples. Today you have shown me that such bridges are possible." Marshal Thompson approached them, having finished securing the prisoners. "Mr. Martinez, I'll need you to come to Tucson to provide testimony about Mayor Hawthorne's conspiracy. Your evidence will be crucial in exposing this land-grabbing scheme and preventing it from spreading to other communities." Sam nodded his agreement, but he had one more concern. "Marshal, these girls need safe passage back to their grandmother. The old woman is sick and depends on the medicine they were gathering." "I'll provide an escort," Marshal Thompson assured him. "It's the least we can do after what they've endured today." As the sun began to set over Copper Creek, the town square that had been filled with hatred and violence just hours earlier was now quiet and peaceful. Justice had prevailed, but Sam knew this was only the beginning of larger changes coming to the frontier. 3 months after the events in Copper Creek, Sam Martinez rode through the same canyon that had brought him to town on that fateful day, but this time he was not alone. Beside him rode Morningstar, now serving as an official translator and mediator between the Apache tribes and the territorial government. The young woman had used her experience to become a voice for peaceful coexistence on the frontier. The investigation into Mayor Hawthorne's conspiracy had revealed a network of corruption that reached far beyond one small Arizona town. The Transcontinental Development Corporation had been illegally seizing land across 3 territories, using bribed officials and manufactured conflicts to drive out both Native Americans and small settlers. Sam's evidence had been crucial in exposing the entire operation, leading to federal intervention and the prosecution of dozens of conspirators. Hawthorne himself had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, while Morrison and his gunmen faced charges for attempted murder and conspiracy. The corrupted mayor's downfall had sent a clear message to other officials who might be tempted to participate in similar schemes. The federal government had also implemented new protections for both Native American lands and small settler properties, making it much harder for large corporations to seize property through fraudulent means. As they rode toward Sam's ranch, Morningstar shared news from her community. "My grandmother recovered fully from her illness," she reported with obvious joy. "The medicine plants we gathered that day were exactly what she needed. She says the Great Spirit protected us by sending you to prevent our deaths." Sam smiled at the thought of the old Apache woman who had sent her granddaughters on what should have been a simple gathering expedition. He had met her during the weeks following the rescue, and her wisdom and kindness had reminded him of his own grandmother back in Texas. The cultural differences that politicians used to divide people seemed much less important when families shared their common humanity. "How are the other girls doing?" Sam asked. He had worried about the psychological effects of their traumatic experience, especially on the younger ones who had been only 12 or 13 years old. "They are healing," Morningstar replied. "At first they had nightmares and were afraid to leave the reservation. But seeing how the truth came out and justice was served has helped them understand that not all white people are their enemies. 2 of them have even started learning English so they can also serve as translators when needed." The transformation in Copper Creek had been equally remarkable. With Hawthorne gone and the truth about the land-grabbing scheme revealed, the townspeople had begun reaching out to their Apache neighbors for the first time in years. Trade relationships that had been severed by mistrust and propaganda were slowly being rebuilt, benefiting both communities. Doc Henderson had been elected as the new mayor, running on a platform of honest government and peaceful coexistence. One of his first acts had been to establish a joint council with representatives from local Apache tribes to resolve disputes through discussion rather than violence. The success of this arrangement was already being studied by other frontier communities. Sam's own life had changed dramatically as well. His role in exposing the conspiracy had brought him to the attention of territorial officials, who offered him a position as a special investigator for cases involving conflicts between settlers and Native Americans. His unique ability to work with both communities made him valuable as a mediator and fact-finder, but perhaps the most significant change was the end of his isolation. The events in Copper Creek had reminded Sam that he could not hide from the world's problems on his remote ranch. His intervention had saved 7 innocent lives and prevented a much larger tragedy, showing him that he still had important work to do in the world. As they approached his ranch buildings, Sam could see that his property was no longer the lonely outpost it had been. A small Apache camp had been established nearby, where families came to trade and to consult with Morningstar on matters requiring communication with territorial officials. The arrangement benefited everyone involved, providing security for the Apache visitors and companionship for Sam. The territorial governor wants to establish similar programs in other areas, Morningstar told him as they dismounted near his house. He believes that what we've accomplished here could serve as a model for the entire Southwest. He's asked me to speak at a conference in Santa Fe next month. Sam felt proud of how much the young woman had grown in confidence and authority since their first meeting. The terrified girl who had faced execution in Copper Creek had become a respected leader working to build bridges between cultures. Her courage and wisdom were already making a difference far beyond their local community. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, Sam stood on his porch looking out over the peaceful valley. The same landscape that had once seemed empty and lonely now bustled with activity as Apache and Mexican families worked together on various projects. Children from different cultures played together, learning each other's languages and customs. It had taken a moment of crisis to reveal the truth about the forces trying to divide the frontier communities. But that crisis had also revealed the possibility of something better. Justice had not only saved 7 innocent lives, but had opened the door to a future where different peoples could coexist and thrive together. Sam knew there would be other challenges ahead. Not everyone on the frontier was ready to embrace the changes that were coming, and there were still plenty of people who profited from division and conflict. But the success in Copper Creek had proven that ordinary people of goodwill could overcome hatred and fear when they worked together for justice. As he watched the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, Sam reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when he had seen smoke rising from the town. He had set out to save 7 Apache girls from an unjust hanging, but in the process he had discovered a new purpose and a new community that would sustain him for the rest of his days.